Hello there, Callum here, and welcome to the EU in Review, where I review the Star Wars Expanded Universe as I experience it. Today I'm going to be talking about The Mandalorian Armor, Book 1 of the Bounty Hunter's Wars. Now, I thought it'd be cool to read the blurb first, so I'll do just that. And that's just on the back here, and I might put up the picture in editing so that people can read along if they want to. He's the most feared and successful bounty hunter in the galaxy. He is Boba Fett. And even the most hardened criminals tremble at his name. Now he faces the deadliest challenge of his infamous career, an all-out war against his most dangerous enemies. The Mandalorian Armor. As the rebellion gathers force, Prince Shizor proposes a cunning plan to the Emperor and Darth Vader. I just like saying his name like that. Smash the power of the Bounty Hunters Guild by turning its members against each other. Only the strongest and most ruthless will survive, and they can be used against the rebellion. It's a job for the fiercely independent Boba Fett, who jumps at the chance to destroy his rivals. But Fett soon realizes the game is rigged, as he finds himself the target of murderous factions, criminal conspiracies, and the evil at the Empire's dark heart. Boba Fett has always finished first, and in this game, anything less is death. So it sounds pretty cool when you read it out. Alright, I'll get jumping straight into my notes here. I think it's cool just from the beginning. This actually starts with it taking place during the events of Return of the Jedi. So it's after the first section with Jabba the Hutt's sail barge blowing up and Boba Fett falling into the Sarlacc pit, and it has, spoiler alert, Dengar discovering him and taking care of him. So it's really awesome how there's from Empire Strikes Back, we have Shadows of the Empire, Tales from Jabba's Palace really augments the movie, and then this is pretty much a straight afterwards continuous story. So it doesn't feel like there's a gap where you might be missing what some of the major characters are doing, and it's awesome to have the feeling of that. And yeah, so into the actual story a bit. So there's two parts to this. There's parts where it says now, which is during the events of Return of the Jedi, and there's a then, which are flashbacks basically, which are back around just past A New Hope, where it starts off, which is cool because the then moments offer little tidbits and information that foreshadow what's going to happen in the now bits foreshadow that what'll happen in the then. And so it's awesome to read a little bit of, like, in a way I almost questioned it. It's like, you know the outcome of what happened back then, but as I read more of it, it was really cool. And from the start, it builds intrigue really well. So there are different droid names on page 32. I'll chuck them up in editing. SH Sigma 1B-B. Sigma meaning summation of the values. And 1 lowercase e-xe. So it's really the one with Sigma in it that's interesting. If you don't know, just look at what I put up in editing. It's interesting that the droid self-preservation programs override the orders from Dengar, I thought. Or it said later, achieving their primary function of caring for their patients, which I guess by surviving, they are able to treat their patients more. Also, Neela, which is a prominent character, she's actually on the front here. If I can put this closer to the one, it's this character here. And then she says she was Orla's friend, but she's actually not mentioned in Tales from Jabba's Palace or any books outside of the Bounty Hunter Wars trilogy, which I looked it up to check. So there's a little bit of something I thought happened and then it didn't, so it's explainable. But yeah, in Tales of the Bounty Hunters, it seems as if Dengar was taking Boba Fett off planet to receive treatment, and then he was in the medical capsule on the Punishing One, which is his ship. But instead, he transported him in this to his base that he had on Tatooine, which I thought that there was a bit of, why didn't he take him off planet? I guess it got to him quicker as far as medical treatment went. After going back to the palace and retrieving the medical droids, because they served in Jabba's palace, it might have been better to go off-world for medical treatment for Boba Fett, but then again, this story is really cool, so I'm fine with it the way it is. And the medical explanations they give are cool, and you can read it for that. And as it explains that Neil had dragged Boba Fett out from at least the edge of the Sarlacc pit when he escapes. It makes sense because in his Tales from Jabba's Palace story, above like that, he is in a daze and doesn't really know how he gets all the way out to where he's found by Dengar. Zackus, on the next part, I have the Bounty Hunters Guild introduction. Zackus is referred to as a new guild member. So the events of this will make sense later, but at the time I was thinking he must separate from the Bounty Hunters Guild before Empire Strikes Back and become more independent to have his story in Tales of the Bounty Hunters. I think Bubba having an uninflected voice lines up with being cloned. Even though it's raised by Jango Fett, he's still a clone and probably developed an uninflected accent, not influenced by anything else. And yeah, that lines up with him being a clone. I thought that was good, because this is in 1998. I believe this was published. Oh, yeah, published first in 1998, so the prequels weren't out yet. And about the Bounty Hunters Guild as well, there's one back around A New Hope. So from Tales of the Bounty Hunters, it's interesting to think that Fallen wanted to make a Bounty Hunters Guild under the New Republic when what happened to the Bounty Hunters Guild happened in this story. And it's interesting because they think, as this, I'm thinking of this, it's actually interesting because it must be that under the Empire, this is what happened, so we want to make it under the New Republic where the same thing would happen. Now, we're introduced to Kuda Muba, which is an interesting species called an assembler. This species only comes up in this trilogy as well, and it's interesting with the growing of nodes and going through space in basically its own interconnected web with little sub-assemblies which perform jobs for him, basically. And it's basically like the knowledgeable one that'll facilitate bounties if you want to be anonymous and stuff like that. From reading this book, I got an image of something similar to a spider, but with a more chitinous insect-like body, if that makes sense. Now after that, it actually seems to imply in this again, like Tales of the Bounty Hunters, that Mandalorians aren't well known in the galaxy at all, which might become an issue later as I read some of the other works, but I'll see how it progresses, because it probably will make sense as I read more. But I thought that Mandalorians, especially with the clone army, would have been more well known to the galaxy, at least the ones that they're relevant to. There's also a little thing in the bounty when Boba Fett is... Well, Boba Fett's really cunning in his entry into Bounty Hunters Guild. Read the book for that scene. It's all cool. It's interesting though, they have a feast when he arrives because story. But touching the wine with his gloved hand was considered respectful. But it's a bit different to what I'd perceive as something that's respectful compared to having a sip of the wine and then leaving the rest of it. But it's interesting, these little things. Now here's something I had to mull over for a bit. In this book, it sounds like Shizor built Black Sun rather than it existing before and he took it over. I thought maybe it was named something else, or that he picked up what was left and built it up into what it was. So some of this was in pages 125 and 131 if you want to have a look at what I'm talking about. It seems most likely that the wording that he did and Black Sun in the Clone Wars supports the idea of it being like... So Black Sun being in the Clone Wars appears to be supporting that as propaganda for a redesign of history. That's a little thing I'd say there. Because Black Sun wasn't active. So on checking, Black Sun was fragmented on 33 before the Battle of Yavin and reorganised in 31 before the Battle of Yavin. That time when it was reorganised must have been when Shizor took control. And so I think that makes sense with the appearance in some of the Clone Wars multimedia project as well as the Clone Wars TV series in that it existed. I just remembered that it was in the multimedia project because Black Sun's connected with the Medstar duology and a couple of other places. Medstar duology is a really good duology as well if you wanted to read it. Oh, the Emperor talks a fair bit in front of Shizor, like it appears to be that he openly trusts Shizor with some of the inner thoughts that I'd think him and Vader would just talk about. But it seems in line that he doesn't have any fear that he'll be taken down. And that as a politician, he would have talked a lot in the prequels. And so he's still talking like a politician. It's cool to see Kradosk, which is Bosk's father, and learn more about Bosk's family and his past, which I'll leave you to read it if you want to. And it's interesting how Ob Fortuna is a servant in the Bounty Hunters Guild, is a distant relation or at least a clan member to Bib Fortuna. I like how they make that connection and tie it together. And it was at this point in reading the story that I was thinking that they used the word Barv a lot. B-R-V-E. Yeah, B-A-R-V-E, sorry. And that seems like it repeats itself a little bit much, I think. But it still makes sense. It just seems like they read above like that and just wanted to use that word throughout as much of it as they could. Now, it says in this book that the Sarlacc has buried its nest before there were even sentient beings on Tatooine. Therefore, it must be way back in the days of the Old Republic that the Sarlacc is actually come from. Even before Knights of the Old Republic, the video game. And, well, I think Tatooine was colonised back in Knight Errant as well. Oh no, that was a bit later, but yeah. All the way back before KOTOR, somewhere in the middle between Dawn of the Jedi and Knights of the Old Republic, when Tatooine was colonised, is pretty much that time period before it was colonised. The Sarlacc must have appeared there, which is really cool to think about how old it is. It's over 5,000 years old at least. And I think it's cool how the Sarlacc is still alive, and it lines up with a Barv like that. which is Boba Fett's tale from Tales from Jabba's Palace. Cannot English. Anyway, it lines up with that because he keeps him alive to torture him later on. Because he holds a big grudge against this Sarlacc. Now, the lion Nessie, I believe I'm pronouncing it correctly, could be Nessie or lion Nessie, I like to pronounce it, are an interesting species, being a species that has survived based on interpreting language, and then became, when they were intergalactic travel, they became prominent in diplomacy, according to this novel. Now, I hope to see some of them a bit later as well in other novels, but I don't know if they actually are in later ones, or there seems to be a bunch of stuff I've looked up and they just appear in this. Like Neela, I didn't try to spoil myself too much, but Neela only appears in this trilogy because I wondered if she's in anything else, and a few things like that. Now, I was at this point that I'm reading Zackus, and he seems to be a completely different character to Tales of the Bounty Hunters. Now, I know it's before his story in that book, but in, I think it's Of Possible Futures, was his story. He seems really calm, collected. He has his intuition to locate targets and everything. Whereas in the Bounty Hunter Wars, he seems really timid and more irrational and frantic, like he's fidgeting when he's nervous and that sort of stuff. So I'll chalk that down, I think, to character development in between those times, and I'll see what development there is later in the series as well. The trilogy, I should say, not the series, but it could be either. Now, there's an ovoid ship. Now, it seems similar in design from how it's described to a Geonosian solar sailor, but it's ovoid and it seems to have this parasail looking bit on it and that sort of thing. And something else interesting, I thought. It says that fluid systems in ships and that sort of thing were being back in the days of the Republic. Now, I believe when they say the Republic, they're meaning back in the days before it became the Empire, and actually back in the prequels, they didn't seem to use fluid systems. They seemed to use the same systems as the original trilogy used, as far as they're not fluid ones, they're electronic, or I forget exactly how they work quite at the moment, but it's interesting. Now, to know how to pronounce this bounty hunter's name, Dahan, or Dahan, he's a really cool character, I think. It goes into a whole bit of, he became this monstrosity, basically, that turned his body into a cyborg with a giant laser cannon on it. It's pretty awesome. It also says about a past between him and Boba Fett, which would be cool to read if it exists. I'm not sure. I haven't read it in the novels, so it might be in a short story or a comic, which would be cool to read, but I haven't seen it yet. So if anyone knows, just say. That'd be cool. On page 323, there is a typo. If I find it... $323. Yep. No. I believe that's right. Yep. 323. Where is it here? I should have checked it. No. Not off the top of just looking at it, but it had though instead of thought, which makes sense when you read the sentence. I'll see if I can find it. One moment. Yeah, it's just here. His kind of work, though Neela, which is supposed to be thought Neela, because the first part's in italics and it is her thoughts. So, interesting little tidbits. The hideouts around Tatooine are a cool idea. And it's interesting that Boba Fett had a full set of spare armor, I thought. And his armaments and everything that he would need. I think it's cool that the Tonica sisters got a cameo in this book. So, because I haven't seen them much in the novels. And the membrane creatures I call. No, not membrane. Membrane. They're little slug things that absorb acoustic energy, and as they absorb it, they grow layers and get bigger and bigger. I thought that was a really cool idea, especially with them being organic listening device, basically, and not that, going into using an electronic one. So, there's a quote on page 376 that I would like to read out. Alrighty. It makes a sexist comment. Oh, they weren't afraid to never shy about leading into these themes in this. It says he was exactly the sort who'd forget all about a female's presence, that whenever he didn't have any specific use for her. And that they had these themes. It really adds to the story, I think, of building that sort of character, and it's cool. And the ending is a cool cliffhanger to lead into the next book. And I just started reading it, and it went straight off from the end of this book, and it's cool. It's cool to see how Boss grows as a character, especially at the end, between the now and the then storylines. So in the flashbacks he's a bit more irrational, whereas in the current day ones I'll say that he's thinking about things more, and he's a bit more experienced, I'll say, which is cool. And as I said, the now offers interesting tidbits to foreshadow the events in the then, which is cool. And overall, the writing style really does well in showing the cold and emotional parts, especially when calling people, which are the targets, merchandise and all that sort of stuff. And overall, this is a great book. I've loved it, and definitely worth checking out, as pretty much an awesome lead on from Return of the Jedi to see what happens with Boba Fett, as well as an interesting storyline in the past that I didn't know about before, and which may not be repeated again. So that's this review, and feel free to check out my others, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.